Hey, we're about a week out from the opener for turkey season here in Maryland, and I'm up here on a popular piece of public hunting land, dotting my I's, crossing my T's. Last week, Dana and I drew some quota permits and rode down Tennessee for the opener down there, and we did some scouting pre-season. We got in there and located quite a few birds. There were a lot of birds around, so we had our hopes up. And opening morning, we got in there and found a truck parked right where we had planned on going. So we drove on down the road and heard a couple birds gobbling way up on top of a knob. We did everything we could to get up there by first light. We just couldn't quite make it. When we got up on top of the knob, the birds were already flying down. And we saw them fly down. They saw us flying down, and everything got real quiet and they got out of there. So the next morning we got out, and the spot we had chosen, nobody was there. So we beat feet up to the top of the hill, got set up on the edge of the field, and the birds started gobbling pretty good. But right as it was getting light, two trucks came down the road, drove right past our truck, pulled over 100 yards down, cut right across the open field, walked out there, put out decoys, and set up and started hammering hen calls. Needless to say, we didn't get a bird with interference like that going on. Don't be that guy. Scout a couple of different spots where there are birds, and if you get to one spot in the morning and there's a truck or two parked there already, go on down the road. Have a little courtesy for your fellow hunters out there. Now, what I'm doing up here today is I know this area gets a lot of pressure, and I'm not scouting for birds so much as making my final setup. Michael and I were back in here, and we scouted a week or so ago, a couple weeks ago it's been now, I guess, and we found some birds roosted on flooded timber back in the middle of this overgrown patch of woods. It's just full of briars back in there, thick. It's almost impenetrable, and that's the kind of place you want to be on a crowded public hunting area. What I'm doing today is I got back in there, and it still looks real good. Found a bunch of hen signs, so I know the birds are roosting down there. What I did was, when I got to the spot, I started my GPS because I don't want to hang glow tacks and flagging so I can find my way back to the roost, and it's almost impossible to get back in there in the dark through that thick stuff without getting turned around a little bit. So what I did was I got my GPS and I followed a deer trail from my waypoint that I marked where we want to hunt with. And I just followed this deer trail down through the thick briars. And they made a convenient, quiet trail, a few hundred yards, right out to the edge of the field. Now, come opening day, I can just get back there, start my GPS, walk to my track log, and follow that convenient red line right to where I want to go. Now, we got one more problem to deal with, and that's another reason I want to be right on top of the roost. The 17-year cicadas are going to emerge this spring, and I remember last time that happened, when the sun started getting up and those buggers started hollering, you couldn't hear the turkeys once they flew down. The bugs were just too loud. So we want to be close, we want to be on top of the birds this year so we can keep in audio contact and the bugs don't screw us up. It's going to be an interesting spring. Why don't you tag along with us and see if we can't hang our tag on a tom turkey here in Maryland this year. Okay, it's Monday morning, the second week of the season, and I am back up here on the same piece of public land I started hunting last week. Last week was pretty slow. I hunted 4 days last week, and I only heard birds gobbling one of those days. That was the last day I hunted up here. Michael came up and hunted with me. We went into that roost area we had set up, and two birds started going off at the break of day, and it wasn't long after that that a guy came in, set up right on top of us, started scratching hen call. That didn't sound a whole lot like a hen. And that bird shut down. We didn't hear anything else out of turkeys that morning. So That's the way it is on these public lands. A lot of times, the reason you won't get a bird on public land is because of the interference. Most of the time it's unintentional. It's just other hunters setting up on top of you, screwing you up, walking around in fields, busting birds off the roost. And when you got a lot of guys plowing onto a woodlot an hour before daybreak, doing owl calls and walking around, and then walking around in the fields, you're not going to hear and see a lot of birds. It spooks the area up, and it's impossible to hunt a spooked turkey. They fade into the brush, and once they're spooked, you're not going to hear or see them. But last week, even though I didn't hear birds, I did see birds. I saw these birds and these two strutters down here in this field and watched them for quite a while. I came back and hunted those birds one of the mornings I was up here. About 7:15, a hen came out, walked right by me in the field where I was set up. I had my hopes up pretty high after that happened, and about 10 minutes later, heavy equipment started working in the next field down. So I sat and listened to that for a little while, but the birds were working that tree line when I first spotted them, and all that disturbance down there, I couldn't be patient any longer. I didn't want to sit and listen to it, so I kind of did a little running and gunning. Well, that was an exciting morning. I had 3 of them going off at me. I love that. I love it. You know, the way I wound up here was yesterday. I was coming in, I was following my little red line on the GPS down through the thick stuff to get to that spot I had set up. And I got off the trail a little bit. So instead of busting brush and crashing through the briars trying to figure out where it was, I decided to just sit down and wait for first light and backtrack and see if I couldn't pick up the trail visually. As it got light, I had a gobbler go off, not 50 yards from where I decided to sit down. And then another one went off. To make matters worse, I had a hen roosted right up in the tree on my right, about 10 yards. And when she flew down, that gobbler hit the ground not 10 yards away from me. I could hear him fluff up, spitting, drumming, but he was on the other side of that thick hummock of briar, and I could not see him. All I could do was sit there and wait for him to move off a little bit. And as fate would have it, there was a guy out on the field edge who decided to start yachting on a box call real loud, and those birds moved away from that. That's what they pressured birds do. They gobble good and walking straight away from a loud call. So he ended up chasing them back through the woods. I could hear it happen, and he'd come in and yacht, and they'd move off 50, 70 yards. He'd come in, yacht, and they'd move off again. He eventually shut them down completely, but it's a shame because those birds were hot. It would have been just a matter of repositioning to find the right opening. So what I did after those birds shut down was I got back in here and found the opening right here where they're flying down at. I got in this morning, those 3 birds were going off. And I did some soft calling and a light series of yelps about 6:30. And that bird sat down right over there about 50 yards from me. That's all I could see was red and white crest of a fan back in the thick stuff. And he seemed like he was moving over into the opening here. The hen came through, and the last I heard of him was a distant gobble in the field, which is about 100 yards up that way. So I've been sitting here ever since, hoping he might circle back around, but I don't know. But yeah, I like this setup. I have a good feeling about this spot. I just came through to the other side of that thick briar, found a nice spot I could sit down, and it's kind of open where I can get a shot off to 20, 30 yards. And they're definitely flying down in this bottom here, 100 yards off the field or so. So, I may be back here and try this spot again. Well, there we go. 6:15 in the morning, and I've got a beautiful 2-year-old public land gobbler down and tagged in the early morning sunshine. You know, the pressure has been terrible out here this year. I ended up pulling off that roost because there were 3 other guys back in there every morning. I went in there, and when there's that many guys hunting the same roost, somebody's going to bump the bird. So I came up here to this other area. Michael had told me he'd been hearing a bird back in here, and he was nice enough to share the location of this bird with me because he doesn't have much more chance to hunt this year. And I knew exactly where he was, and I got back in here this morning and just sat and listened. Walked down the trail, got near the area, sat and listened, and I heard birds way down across the way here on the private property, and I figured this late in the season, it's May 18th, that they would have wandered off and maybe be wandering around looking for hens. But I decided to creep up to the edge of public land and call. I never got that far. Bird gobbled on its own about 50 yards behind me in the woods. As that happened, turns out there was another guy right on top of me, and I had driven both parking lots on this area. There was nobody here when I got here, but there was a guy set up on the edge of the field about 60, 70 yards away from me. I was back in the woods near where the bird was roosted, and he just started. The bird gobbled at it a couple times and then stopped responding to it. While this was going on, a real hen said cluck, cluck, cluck back in the brush. So I just sat down between the real hen and this gobbler and mimicked what that real hen had said. Yup, yup, yup. And this bird flew down, came right to me, strutted around, spit, drum. I had to wait for the shot because he was back in the brush. But when he did step out, he was about 10 yards, and I nailed him pretty good. He didn't even flop. So, just goes to show you, these public lands, don't give up. Even if there's a lot of pressure, just stick with it, stick with it. Now I got to get back in that roost, see if I can film my second tag. I've only got a couple days left. I think there's 4 days left this year to hunt turkeys, but maybe those guys will be out of there. Hey, check us out on the web. We're camochairproductions.com. You can find us there, or you can find us at Sharing the Outdoors at YouTube. We've got a lot of great outdoor adventures coming up this summer. Going to be doing a lot of fishing. I'll be out trying to fill another turkey tag. We'll see how that works out. But we appreciate your subscription, and we hope to see you again real soon. Get out and enjoy some outdoor adventures of your own.